The moment Alexander Reed stepped into the bright white corridor of the emergency wing, something inside him tightened, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, fear mixed with a haunting sense of déjà vu. The sterile smell of disinfectant, the echo of hurried footsteps, and the coldness of the overhead lights felt strangely familiar, dragging him back to a chapter of his life he had closed long ago. He didn't know why he had been called here, why a nurse had asked him to come urgently, why his heart was pounding as if warning him of something life-altering. But everything changed when he saw her, Emma, his ex-wife. The woman he had once loved so fiercely, and the woman he had lost just as fiercely. She stood there trembling beside a small hospital bed, her face pale, her eyes red, and her hand clinging desperately to a little boy who looked like he was fighting both pain and fear. And then, as Alexander's gaze locked onto the child's face, the world around him collapsed, because the boy looked exactly like him. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us create more life-changing stories. Alexander froze, unable to move as the past and present collided in a way he could have never prepared himself for. The boy had the same deep brown eyes he had seen in the mirror his entire life, the same slight tilt in the eyebrows, the same small dimple on the left cheek. It was as if he were staring at a younger reflection of himself. 1,000 unanswered questions flooded his mind. Who was this child? Why was Emma here? Why did she look so terrified? For 6 long years, he had tried burying the pain of their separation, of their broken marriage, of the harsh words spoken, the misunderstandings that tore them apart, the wounds that neither of them had healed from. After the divorce, Emma had disappeared from his world, taking nothing from him, asking for nothing, vanishing as if she had never wished to be connected to his name again. But as he stood in that hallway watching her hover protectively over the boy, he realized the universe wasn't done with them, not even close. The nurse's voice finally broke the suffocating silence, urging them to follow as the boy was rushed down the hall toward an examination room. The wheels of the hospital bed squeaked loudly against the polished floor, and Emma walked beside it with trembling steps, her hands never leaving the child's. Alexander found himself walking on the other side of the bed, instinctively mirroring her movement, matching her pace, feeling his heart race faster with each passing second. He tried to understand what was happening, but the only thing he knew for certain was that he could. To walk away not from the boy, and not from Emma, even if they were no longer part of his life. Something greater was pulling him forward. Inside the exam room, doctors surrounded the child, checking vitals, inserting tubes, speaking in urgent medical terms that made Emma's shoulders shake. Alexander stood helplessly in the corner, watching Emma wipe the tears from her son's cheeks, whispering words of comfort he could not hear but deeply felt. He'd once imagined her as a mother. He had once imagined himself standing next to her in moments just like this, sharing the weight of fear, love, and responsibility. But life had taken them down separate roads. He had buried himself in work, becoming a billionaire not through privilege but through relentless ambition, while she had chosen peace over wealth, disappearing from the noise of his world. And now, this child, this boy who looked like him, in ways that could not be coincidence. His presence was a storm that stirred everything Alexander had suppressed for years. As the minutes passed, Alexander's mind wandered back to the collapse of their marriage. It had been a difficult season in their lives, his company expanding rapidly, his priorities skewed, his absence constant, and Emma feeling like a ghost in her own home. Their fights had grown louder, their silences heavier. Neither had cheated, neither had intended to hurt the other, but sometimes too good. People still lose each other when love is overshadowed by life's pressures. The divorce had been sudden, painful, and final. Emma had walked away quietly, refusing alimony, refusing any financial support, choosing instead to rebuild her life on her own terms. He had let her go, thinking she deserved someone who could give her more time, more heart, more presence. But watching her now fragile, afraid, clinging to a child he didn't know existed filled him with a remorse he couldn't ignore. When the doctor finally stepped back, he explained that the boy had collapsed, suddenly, likely due to severe dehydration and a possible underlying condition that needed immediate testing. Emma's legs gave out for a moment, and Alexander instinctively stepped forward, catching her before she hit the floor. She didn't push him away. She didn't look at him with the anger he had prepared himself for. Instead, she simply leaned against him, exhausted, overwhelmed, and barely holding herself together. In that moment, Alexander felt something crack open inside him, a protective instinct he didn't know he still had for her. When the boy was moved to a more stable room, Emma sat beside him, stroking his hair, whispering soft reassurances. Alexander stood by the doorway, unable to look away. He wanted to ask. He needed to ask, but fear pinned his voice down. What if the answer shattered him? What if Emma told him the boy wasn't his? What if she had moved on, found someone else, built a new life? But then, why had the child inherited so many unmistakable traits that were uniquely his? Hours passed. Emma finally stepped outside into the quiet hallway, her face showing years of pain and exhaustion. She looked older, not in a physical sense, but in the way someone does when life has forced them to carry too much on their own. The sight made Alexander feel a guilt so deep he could barely breathe. He gathered the courage to speak, but Emma beat him to it. She began explaining the last 6 years in slow, shaky words. After the divorce, she had discovered she was pregnant. She had wanted to tell him, but at that time, Alexander had become a public figure, surrounded by business deals, headlines, and relentless pressure. She had feared the child would be dragged into a world she didn't want for him: paparazzi, attention, and expectation. She didn't want her child to be the heir of a billionaire legacy before he even understood what living meant. And she didn't want to be accused of using the pregnancy as leverage or pity. So she made a choice, a painful, lonely, impossible choice. She decided to raise him alone, not because she didn't trust Alexander, but because she didn't trust the world he lived in. She had planned to tell him one day, but that day kept moving further as their lives drifted apart. Alexander listened, motionless, every word striking him like a blade. He didn't blame her. He blamed himself for not being there, for not being the kind of man she could rely on, for not giving her a safe space to share something so important. And now, the truth stood between them in the form of a fragile little boy fighting for his health. As the night deepened, Alexander found himself sitting beside the child's bed, staring at the small face that mirrored his own. The boy's breathing softened, his lashes fluttering slightly as he slept. Alexander felt a heaviness in his chest, a blend of awe, regret, and overwhelming love he had never known before. He placed a shaky hand near the boy's, not touching him, just taking in the reality that this was his son, his blood, his future, a child he never knew existed until today. And as he sat there, he silently vowed to never leave again, to never let Emma carry this burden alone, to never miss another moment of his son's life. Morning light filtered into the room as the child slowly opened his eyes. His gaze flickered between his mother and Alexander, curiosity shining in those brown eyes. Alexander felt his throat tighten. He didn't know how to bridge the gap. He didn't know how to introduce himself to a life he had missed entirely. But the boy gave him a small, gentle glance, one that felt like a quiet acceptance, a beginning. It was enough. The next few hours were filled with updates from doctors, improvements in the child's condition, and a fragile sense of hope. Alexander stayed through it all, bringing Emma water, handling paperwork, speaking with specialists, and silently promising himself he would spend the rest of his life making up for the years he had missed. Emma watched him, her heart softening in ways she didn't expect. She saw the man she had once loved, the one who cared deeply, felt deeply, and loved fiercely underneath the armor of ambition. As the day passed, the tension between them eased, not because things were forgiven or forgotten, but because they both realized the past had brought them here for a reason. They weren't the same people anymore. They had grown, changed, and learned through pain. And maybe, just maybe, this moment was the universe's way of giving them a second chance, not necessarily as lovers, not necessarily as husband and wife, but as two people connected forever by the life of a child who needed them both. They stood by the boy's side as he drifted peacefully into a safe sleep. Emma leaned her head against the bed rail, exhausted but calmer. Alexander stood close, watching over both of them. The silence between them was no longer heavy. It was healing. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support truly means the world and helps us create more powerful stories like this. Before we end, please comment below. Every child deserves love and truth. And that is the story of how one hospital bed revealed the truth Alexander never expected.